Thank you so much, Raina, and good afternoon to everyone. Happy Women's History Month. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again for your patience. So, as Raina said, I have the pleasure this afternoon of introducing our phenomenal guest facilitator for today's panel discussion, Decantee Men's Cole. So Decantee serves as Vice President for the Mid-Atlantic at JP Morgan Chase Global Philanthropy. She oversees strategic grant making in the Greater Washington region and is an economic and community development practitioner. Decantee worked on the ground in the country's most distressed communities, and prior to joining JP Morgan Chase, she served as the Director of Policy at the Center for Community Progress, a national nonprofit based in Flint, Michigan, that equips communities with the tools and resources needed to effectively turn vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties into assets for neighbors and neighborhoods. Additionally, Decantee has served as a deputy director at the Detroit Land Bank Authority, the country's largest land bank, and as a fellow with the White House Strong Cities, Strong Communities initiative embedded in the city of Detroit. She brings international experience and best practice to her grant-making role, having previously worked on local economic development projects in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, including infrastructure investment strategies in Iraq and Zambia for the United Nations, and community development projects tied to the 2012 London Olympics. She holds a master's from the London School of Economics in Urban Regeneration and Affordable Housing, and a Juris Doctorate from the Georgetown Law Center, and a BA from the University of Miami in International Studies and Economics. So Decantee, thank you so much for being here. We are so grateful for your partnership, your support, not only as a funder, but also a thought partner in this work more broadly. We're excited for today's conversation, and I will now hand it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to the audience for joining this really timely conversation as part of Women's History Month. I'm so excited to get started with this incredible panel about breaking the bias. And as we know, this is a timely conversation in this moment, particularly as we know that women of color and women in particular are drivers of economic mobility. And within this region, particularly women of color, I just wanted to say a few things at the top about how critical supporting women in their leadership position, but also in supporting the delivery of services and resources to women, particularly women of color, is incredibly important in this moment in time. As we know, the pandemic was incredibly and continues to be hugely impactful on women in the workforce. Over 2 million women have left the workforce during the height of the crisis. And unemployment rates for women of color, particularly Black and Latino women, continues to remain persistently high. And we also know that for Black and Latino women, the financial effects of their already vulnerable financial position remains persistently tricky and difficult as well, with the minimal gains from the stimulus balance that supported a number of households nationally. Within this region, we know that for the communities that have the lowest median incomes, those households, a number of those households are led by women of color. For example, in Ward 7 and 8, between 69 to 73% of households with children are led by single mothers, often women of color. And so that's why at JPMC, we are intentionally investing in women of color. We just recently announced $10 million to support women driving economic mobility within this region. In Ward 7 and 8, Martha's Table is leading an initiative focused on early education. And excitingly, in Baltimore, we're working with the Latino Economic Development Center, who's leading leading work to support women of color developers, as well as expanding the pathway for more women of color in the construction trades. So I thank you for giving me a little bit of moment to talk about our investment, particularly in women and women of color. And with that, I'd love to turn to our incredible panel to introduce themselves. And I will start with Dr. Abram, who's on the phone. And so I think she's having a little bit of trouble. And can I start with you, Monica Mitchell?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Decanty. My name is Monica Mitchell. I serve as Vice President of Social Impact for Wells Fargo. I lead the grant making, philanthropy, and community development work for Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia with the firm. I've had the pleasure of working in this region for the past decade, and also a native of Baltimore. Thanks for having me join.
And I'd like to then turn to the CEO of Mana Inc., Sasha Gangas, to introduce herself.
Thanks, Decanty. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to speak on this important topic. I'm Sasha Gangas. I am the president and CEO of Mana Inc. I come from, my background is in affordable housing and community development. I've spent the last 20 years of my career in affordable housing and community development. I came from a national for-profit affordable housing development company overseeing real estate and housing transactions throughout the Mid-Atlantic. And I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk about myself and Mana's work.
Thank you, Sasha. I'd like to then turn to Janelle Anderson, engineer and founder of AMAR Group.
Hi, my name is Janelle Anderson. It is a pleasure to be here. Actually, I'm an architect and founder.
My apologies.
And that's okay. Architect and founder of AMAR Group, which stands for Architecture, Management, and Research. We've been in this area for the past over 30 years, working with multifamily construction, also working in construction management, and working on restaurants, and right now it's a nightclub. So we have a varied portfolio. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Well, I'd love to just get started with hearing more about your professional journeys, and particularly who were the women in your life, either personal or professional, who've influenced your leadership style. And anyone, feel free to jump in.
Well, I can start. And the reason I'm hesitating, because I graduated in '82. So I worked for 10 years. That was between '82 and '92. And during that time period, I was working mainly with male architects in a male-dominated field. And so my leadership style comes more from them than from females, I would say. Mm-hmm. And so I had to create my style based on my environment, based on who I am, based on what I had to deal with, based on ignorance. I just had to develop a style within that. So that's why I kind of hesitated a little bit to jump in. But my leadership style, I would say, is more of a pace setter, an encourager, and a motivator. And I do that because of the situations that I have kind of encountered along the way as an architect, where I did not have many, I just had to be pretty much the only one in the room at various times, not just female, but also Black. So it's a little different, I guess you can say.
Well, I really appreciate that, Janelle. And, I think my leadership, skills and qualities come from me being a product of an all girls education. So, from third grade through 12th grade, I attended an all girls school. And I think that when you're in an environment where the best kid in math, the best athlete, the student government president, every single role is inhabited by a girl or a young woman, there's never a question in your mind on whether or not you can do it. You also are in an environment where you see other women as your sisters and encouragers, and you are really working on only competing with yesterday's version of yourself to make sure that you're a better version of yourself. And so I really credit my all girls education with being able to land a leadership position in banking very early. I became a vice president within our company by the time I was 25 years old. I, sat at the table. Within 3 months of joining Wells Fargo, I came in as what was then called a financial specialist, doing investments and lending to consumer banking customers. And back then I was in Baltimore. The Reginald F. Lewis Museum was opening up in Baltimore, and I read a Baltimore Sun article, and I did not see what we were then called Wachovia. I did not see Wachovia listed as one of the funders. So I sent an email to our bank president at the time saying, hey, I'm new, you don't know me yet. But I was really disappointed not to see Wachovia listed as one of the funders in what will be a real transformative opportunity to present African-American history and entrepreneurship in Baltimore. And to his credit, he sent me a very kind email back, assured me that what Wachovia did intend to support, but also asked for my insight on additional opportunities for giving and how Wachovia showed up in the community and in philanthropy, and invited me to be part of what was then our philanthropic contributions committee. So I was this 25-year-old, person very early in my banking career, sitting around a table full of, 60-plus-year-old white guys. And however, because I had always been entrenched in volunteerism and community work had always been central to my upbringing and to how I prioritize myself and showing up, I was able to be a really good resource in directing how we gave in the area. And so, but I did not question the opportunity or the value in my insight. I think because I came from that background where girls' opinions and how we showed up was always valued. And I think that has played a big role in how and where I've been able to get in my career today.
I'll go ahead and take over as well, Dekanti. I will say that my leadership style is really influenced by my upbringing. I'm, originally from Jamaica Island, and I was raised by my grandmother. And I would say that she is the most influential person in my leaderships in terms of me and my leadership style. My grandmother, without a college education, was a humanitarian. She was a community leader. Before I knew what neighborhood development, community development was, at 13 years old, my grandmother was participating and leading the neighborhood group of our community. When there was a hurricane in Jamaica, we housed all of our family's furnitures whose homes were destroyed. So she was a humanitarian from that perspective. And she was an avid reader, even without a college education. And so she really influenced me at a very early age and taught me that, I am enough. And so with that sort of inner upbringing, that really led me into the career that I chose today, and has really sort of taught me how to interact and be a leader. I'm one who is all about coaching, who's all about mentoring. I also, I'm aware of, being a role model. I try to not always have answers, but to help people find answers. And I try to help people figure out, well, what problem are you trying to solve, and to stay focused on that. I've also had situational mentors in my life, not necessarily one to speak of, but there are many women throughout my life who were there at the right time and the right place, who really taught me how to be, a leader and to improve my style. So there are many people who have paved the way for me and who have influenced my leadership style, but particularly it has been my grandmother.
Thank you for that. And each of you actually spoke on the next question that I was going to ask you, but I'd love to go deeper, because you mentioned, Sasha, your grandmother really driving and thinking about community development in a really organic way, and her style and approach influencing you. And Monica, just at 25 years old, knowing that your voice was critically important to how your bank and your firm showed up in the community. And Janelle, you started the conversation talking about being the only woman in the room. I wanted to lean in on that just a little bit more and find out, how are the unique life experiences as a woman? And I'd love to add that intersectionality, because we have it on this panel, as a woman of color in particular. How are your unique life experiences strengthening the way that you show up in your leadership? And if I can turn to you, Monica, to start the conversation.
Sure. I am, in addition to starting my career in banking pretty early, I was also, a mother in my 20s and a single parent. And so, we have always, to Sasha's point, had to be community builders, had to solve for the challenges in our communities way before any institutions, were checking for us, and making sure that that we were creating better circumstances for our families and for our children. And so it's been with many of those experiences, and not only my own lived experiences, but also again, to Sasha's point, the lived experiences of our elders, the lived experiences of our neighbors, and always knowing and understanding the value of that. And quite frankly, elevating that oftentimes, recognizing that those experiences are equal, if not even more important than research that may have taken years to happen, because sometimes those voices, those voices and experiences aren't acknowledged in research. And so I would say that those, my upbringing and those experiences have played a role in just understanding the value that those perspectives can contribute to how, particularly in banking, we show up. Banking is an industry that historically has not invested in certain communities, that, you can look to the origins of redlining and, in other areas, and that those, a lot of those policies started, within the government or within banking. And so to be able to come into an industry with reparative and restorative ideas, you really have to lead with those community perspectives of single parents, of elders, of folks on fixed incomes, of people who have, been able to purchase a home, achieve the quote unquote American dream, and are now struggling to maintain it because folks haven't invested in their communities, and understanding what they need. And also understanding that our organizations don't have to be the solution creators. We just need to be the listeners. Oftentimes, almost always, the members of communities have the solutions. They may need the resources or the access to the resources, and our job is really to listen and elevate those contexts.
So my unique life experience in terms of shaping my career, I think has to do with being, a aware of my environment at an early age, understanding that, that as I reflect and as I have spent a lot of time reflecting, that home is really the first safety net, right? In really helping, allowing people to thrive, having security and stability at home, however you define home, however one defines home, can really affect someone's trajectory, life trajectory in a positive or a negative way. And so, it's no wonder that based on that awareness, particularly growing up in an island and emigrating to the United States after graduating from high school in Jamaica at 15 years old and moving to this country, I really began to be aware of my environment and how the environment and home plays a role in people's lives. So that really influenced me in terms of a passion, which led me to study housing and community development. And I know of no better way to really influence and help people in their lives other than through housing and community development. I really wanted to impact lives, and particularly the lives of children. And after spending the last 20 years building communities and seeing the impacts that it has on people's lives, doing everything from, managing the project and being in the trenches, to overseeing, multi-million-dollar transactions, what I didn't see was, how we can actually influence people's lives from an economic standpoint. Sure, rental housing, provides stability, but what's next? And that's one of the things that attracted me to MANA, is its work in single family and providing the opportunity for families to move along the continuum, to be able to move from rental housing into home ownership. And so applying my passion, my unique experiences, my education, and my expertise to this work has completely shaped what I'm doing today.
And Janelle, would you like to chime
Yes,
in?
yes, unique experiences. In architecture is a very unique feel in itself, in that it's slightly different from Monica, in that we have to be a problem solver and we have to come up with a solution, whether it's working on a multifamily or working on a single family. Now it's slightly different because in a single family, and most of the clients that I meet, sometimes I don't even know how to pronounce architect. It's architect. So this is their first experience with an architect, but what they're doing is they're giving me their life savings, their livelihood, and they're saying, Janelle, Amar Group, help me. And what that means is, give me a beautiful design, but I want to afford this into retirement. So it's not their starter home, but it's a home that it's their legacy home, really. It's their home that they're going to carry on. So it's incumbent upon me, and this is something that I realized, that I have to be so sensitive with others' finances, and I have to be so sensitive to what they're saying to me, in the sense that what they're saying may be this beautiful picture of everything that they want, but what are they really saying? What's the realistic piece? We work a lot with tenant conversions, where a group of folks have an apartment building and they want to convert it to a co-op. And so we have to listen to them and understand that whatever we design, that's going to be divvied up to be their mortgage. So we have to be the answer in that community, so that those folks will stay in place, enjoy the environment, and that environment should not be a toxic environment. So we have to think about environmental justice, as we want to talk about, but we also have to think about social justice as well, and maintaining, can we keep this group of people in this community when it's being gentrified. So listening is so important. And I had to learn that at a very early age. And now it kind of comes natural. And what I do with the folks in my office is we have core values that we work on doing staff meetings so that everyone will know that this is what we're about as an office.
Thank you for that.
Second T, if I could just make a comment, I think we all mentioned listening in one way, shape, or form. And I think just as we talk about and think about the qualities that women bring to, just historically male-dominated fields, I think that's one of the gifts that we do bring, is recognizing the value of listening and not just coming in presuming that we know all of the answers, presuming that we know everyone's needs, and taking a step back and I'm not saying that men can't be listeners, but I do think that that is a strength of women that we're applying in the roles across the industries that we have.
Yeah, I agree, because I have heard that where someone has come to me and say, oh, you're really hearing what I'm saying, which means you're a good listener. Whereas, because architects do have a tendency to come in and impose their philosophy, impose their design sense. And we have to be eclectic in our design, because we are designing somebody's dream, or we are designing somebody's profit share. So we have to be, and the truth is, I think women are excellent listeners. We have to be, because we're the ones who end up raising these kids. And if we don't really listen to what they're saying, we're going to have a messed up society. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. And I believe Dr. Abram was able to join us by phone. Dr. Abram. I believe you're on mute.
Yeah.
Dr. Abram. Okay. While we still work through the technical difficulties, we can continue the conversation.
I think I'm here.
Can you hear us, Dr. Abram?
I think so. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for joining us and overcoming the many technical difficulties that you had to join the conversation. We're really excited that you're able to join. I'd like to just start with making sure that you have an opportunity to introduce yourself, as well as we are talking specifically about the unique role that women play in driving leadership that is really responsive and good at listening to the needs of communities and the clients and people that we serve. So with that, I'd like to turn to you to introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about that question.
Okay, I'm Lilia Abram, President and CEO and owner of Pure Consultants. We're an environmental engineering and civil engineering consulting firm. Been in business for about 43, 44 years now. And I'm not, in terms of listening, I have just had a conversation today with an employee about the need to really listen, and in this case to employees, but to anybody. And if for nothing else, just count to 10 after they finish the sentence before you come back in, because listening to what people are saying is really important. One of the things I have found over the years in the kind of work we do, because who wants a wastewater treatment plant, who wants a landfill, who wants this or that in their community or in their backyard? And it's listening, but you have to listen to what they are really saying. And quite frequently they are saying one thing, but they really mean something else. So you really have to understand the community that you're working in, the people, what their hot points are, what they like, what they don't like. And I have found over the years is when I finally hear someone say my project or our project, when I hear something that lets me know that they have now taken ownership, that means they accept it, and then I go back and say, okay, we can get started now. So that's my input for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abram. And I love that wait 10 seconds before you lean in. And that ownership piece, which I think is really unique to the work that all of us do. You know, Monica, you talked about restorative and reparative work. And Sasha, you talked about how you really understood what home meant and what it means for communities that we're looking to serve. I wanted to talk and turn the conversation a little bit to talk about challenges and barriers, and to really lean in on this question, recognizing again this intersectionality, that we have this incredible panel of women and also women of color, that you both are pushing the conversation, the deep listening, the responsiveness, but also sitting in it as well. And there are barriers and challenges that you face in the work as women. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the significant barriers that you face, but even more so, how you've overcome those challenges.
I can start. I think one thing for me, from our group in our field, we have succeeded when we had women behind the scenes pushing for us. And this is real. I won't even name names, but when we've had women actually believe in what we're doing, and they're saying, hey, Amar Group is up to the challenge. A lot of times architecture is about relationships, who you know, how you can get in. We're not always into the boys club per se, but I have seen that happen, and it's a reality. A lot of times we are up against some severe challenges, especially in construction management. When people aren't really sure we could handle the work side, if we're knowledgeable, you know, what happens if somebody yells at you? Are you going to cry? Are you going to break down? But I think being a female also is an advantage, because nobody really knows what we're going to do in any given situation. If you walk into a room, what's going to happen? So I like to tell women, use that as an advantage. Go in with confidence and make sure that you know your stuff. You're credentialed, you've been through it, you know what to do. So I would say that, if anything, the women who are working behind the scenes to get us to where we are today, I thank them. And they need to continue and also mentor others so that the same thing can happen. Because, and I've told this to somebody, there's an organization I'm working with, and she just came up and she said, Janelle, do you think you can handle this? I said, look, yes, I'm not going to grab something that I know that I'm not capable of, because when I look good, you look good. And that's what it's all about for us.
I'll say that, you know, there's so many challenges and barriers in being a woman leader, and just being a woman in the workplace in general. I mean, if you consider, you know, historically what women have had to go through. We know about the women's suffrage movement, that women really weren't even given the right to vote until the 1920s. And even after women were given the right to vote in the 1920s, Black women in particular, you know, waited decades to even have the opportunity to vote in many places in America. And, women have, even though we have come a long way, we still have a lot of challenges. Often women are the primary caretaker in their home, and they're also the primary breadwinner in the home. Not always, but one of the things that I think has been a common theme in my experience is this notion of, potential versus performance. And what I have found, as a woman, in my 20 plus year career, is that I have had to lean on performance. I have had to lean on really knowing my craft, and I have had to lean on really, learning, studying, studying how to run a meeting. Whether it be up close with another female who's coaching me, or from afar, studying how to manage people. I've had to, perform and really sort of work at it. And so I would say that the way in which I've been able to overcome that barrier is through performance, whereas I believe that in other instances, other people are given opportunities just based on potential. There are many men in our male-dominated industry of housing and community development who are given the opportunity just because of potential. So, women are resilient, and in addition to the many other traits, but I would say that just really, working your craft, building relationships, advocating for yourself, knowing that you can't go at it alone. And there have been many men throughout my career who have also supported me. So I must give that credit where it's also due. But we still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go in terms of, women also coming together in the workplace. I'll stop there.
Well, Sasha, I just really appreciated you making the distinction of performance versus potential. And I think that, not only have we had to demonstrate, our performance, but even on the pay side, folks will get paid based on their potential, where, women often have to advocate on the back end for increased salary based on performance. And so, I think that you just hit on a really important topic that that presents as a barrier, again, across industries. What I found in leaning into how I perform and allowing that to be my validator is that I've been able to really tap into the things that make me a good leader because I'm a woman. For example, the ability to collaborate, the ability to really pick up on and read nonverbal cues that allow me to see when people may not be comfortable with the opportunity or the solution that's being presented, and either ask additional questions in the meeting or follow up afterwards and say, hey, I noticed you had a little bit of hesitation there. Or I noticed your body language. Tell me a little bit more about what you're feeling, and allowing those conversations to continue happening, where someone may express a concern that wasn't expressed in the meeting, but is a valid concern or is a valid thought that should have been addressed to help present a better outcome. And so, and just thinking about how being a woman in leadership and tapping into some of the skills that may come naturally to us, I think we're better collaborators. I think that we do, I think that we operate at a high level of emotional intelligence. I think that we have the ability to see people as people and not as machines, and recognizing the individual contributions that people can bring to the table, and recognizing that, okay, this person may have a great skill in this area, and she may be a people person, and you put her out in the front and she's just able to win over hearts and minds, and this other person may be analytical and wonderful behind the scenes, and leveraging individuals based on their skills rather than seeing each person as a cog in the machine, and and not nurturing and cultivating individual talents. I think all of those things have helped me be able to perform, and not only to perform for myself, but also to be able to be present and to be a good leader for other individuals within the team.
I agree. I love the potential performance. I love that. But at the same time, I noticed that in our industry, we can have architects who are performing poorly, and they continue to get projects from, procurement officers. And we can see, females, Blacks who are struggling, and they're not doing it. What is it? More relationships? Yes, we are performing. We're out here. Our buildings aren't falling down. Our buildings are performing, and still, every year it's, oh, you've got to, explain yourself or renew yourself or recharge yourself. So it's a little frustrating, but it's just life. And that's why, I just have to remember, hey, I'm in this profession because I love it. I'm credentialed, and God only knows I believe in God. So I got to pray so that I won't kill somebody out here. But it's a reality. Yes, we're performing, but what about these people who aren't performing and still getting contracts? So it's a crazy world.
And that speaks to potential.
That's right. That's right. Dr. Abram, are you available to chime in on this question around the barriers and challenges?
Oh my goodness. There are quite a few. It was interesting listening to the conversation about not performing and still getting contracts. For us, you do perform all the time, but it's also very much relationships. We work more in the municipal marketplace. We used to work in the federal marketplace a very long time ago, but we are basically municipal engineers now. And while performance, you don't have the relationships if you don't perform. And performing over time helps to build relationships. And those relationships are very important in winning work. And I tell people a lot of times, I've been around a good little while, they don't win a contract that they put a procurement that they put a lot of time in. And they call around to their team and they ask me sometimes, well, do you think that I should protest this? I said, absolutely not. And they say, why? I said, why? People have already made a decision. Ask for a debrief. And when you go in, use it as an opportunity to market and to continue to strengthen the relationship. And it will all work out in the end. And several times I've had people come back and say, Lilia, I am so happy you told me that, because at the end of the day, for our marketplace, that is really the better way to work and to remove challenges.
Thank you. And thank you to all our panelists for leaning in on that question. I think it's so true, that potential versus performance and how it shows up. I see that there's a number of questions coming through the chat, and I know that we got started a bit late, so I wanted to make sure that we hear from our audience as well. Lindsay, do you mind offering up some of the questions from the chat?
Absolutely. So we have one question. It's Monica, my journey is similar to yours. I'm currently being looked at for a VP position in the near future. However, some of our executives are hesitant due to my age. even though I overperform many of my peers and have data and reports to validate that. How would you recommend I navigate securing that VP position I deserve? And I think, whether it's this VP position or another position of leadership, this seems to be a situation that is pretty commonly felt. So any advice around this question?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is making sure that you're securing mentors, but in this situation, more specifically sponsors, to advocate for you when you are not in those rooms, when those decisions are being made for titles and things like that. And one would hope that equitable decisions are being made when those things happen, but it goes to what the word that we have repeated in the last few minutes, which is relationships. And at least for myself and my part of the journey, I was very intentional about creating sponsors for myself and making sure that I was proactive in sharing my accomplishments with those sponsors, making sure that I was proactive in sharing how my outcomes were supporting their work and the work of other business lines. We're not only supporting my objectives, but the objectives of the company as a whole. I was really intentional about demonstrating how I was taking a 20,000 foot view, not only of the work that I was doing in my career, but how the work that I was doing within my career was supporting the overall goals of the company. And not only the needs that existed at that moment, but also forward thinking and working towards solving future problems that I could foresee. And so being able to one, personally quantify that. And I always keep a document that details, if I'm called to participate in something like, something like this would go on the document Monica has participated in. I'm keeping a running list of the events that I participate in, on the projects that I'm a part of developing, so that when it comes time for me to share that information with someone else or to document my value, whether internally on a performance appraisal or if I'm advocating for another role, that I don't forget it. Because sometimes we do so much stuff that we can forget what we've done, because we're just in the midst of doing it. And so being intentional about keeping that documentation, being intentional about identifying a sponsor, a person who is in those rooms, a person who has a voice and is their voice and insight is respected. That's going to elevate your name, and those opportunities I think are so critical to getting the positions and titles that you're seeking. And I would also encourage that you have sponsors internal to your organization, but also external validators as well. I'm absolutely going to shout out, and I think everybody on this panel could shout out Steve as a wonderful sponsor to many of us, and has, shared and celebrated our names in rooms that we're not in. And, and that has also, I've also been able to leverage that internally within my own organization as well. And so I would just strongly encourage you to be very intentional with yourself and keeping that documentation, and also forging really, mutually beneficial relationships.
Mm-hmm. And if I can chime in here, because I think this is so critical, our Women on the Move, which is in our internal mobility program at JPNC for women, recently shared a post about mentorship versus sponsorship. And I think this goes back to your point, Sasha, about potential versus performance. Mentoring is really performance focused. How do you kind of meet those targets, those deliverables? But sponsors are advocating for your potential, and they're the folks in the room. So I'm really understanding how to identify those sponsors, how to make sure that they have the document of all the things that you've done when they're in the room, and talking about promotions and opportunities and mobility it's so critical.
That's great. Thank you to the both of you. Really practical tips. And that was connected to the next question that we got around how you advocate for yourself when you're in these positions, especially where you might be in a male-dominated field. So I know we only have a few minutes left, but I did want to ask, is there anything that any of the other panelists might like to add to that question in terms of practical steps that women can take.
One thing that I would just share is that, if I've had an idea that I want presented, I will often do the lobbying before the meeting for that idea. So that by the time I get to the meeting, I know I've got folks that are going to back that up. There have often been times that I'll say something in a meeting, I'm not heard, and somebody will say, "Oh yeah, well, I thought that was a good idea that Monica mentioned." And so, absolutely do that work beforehand to make sure that your ideas are heard and implemented. So that's a strategy that I've been able to take throughout my career. Hopefully, it'll get to the point where it doesn't have to happen that way and they can be heard in the room, but until then.
I would say that, ways that you can actually advocate for yourself is the relationship building is key, and not going at it alone is really, really important. Take someone out to lunch. Tell them, ask a lot of questions, show that you're interested, in them, and that, you're seeking, and you may not have to approach it as though you're seeking a mentor or a sponsor necessarily, but that you're just interested in their career, in their path, or their work. And you start to build a relationship there. So, building relationships are really, really important in terms of advocating for yourself. I think that taking, if your job is one that's tactical, I had a job where, from a project management standpoint, it's day to day, you're thinking about one task to the next task, your task to the next. You're thinking about, how do I get from closing to construction, for example, in housing development. But, advocating for yourself, one way to do that is to also think strategically and say to yourself, okay, let me take a couple steps back and, think how this may relate to the organization in a different way. And, find someone who is in a leadership or decision-making role who will listen to you. And share that strategic thinking. So that's another way, is to really just ensure that your thoughts and ideas are being heard by people who are, decision makers.
I totally agree. I also think that this is such a large world. We have to find our niche. We are architects, wet utility engineers, and inspectors. And so for architects, there's so many agencies. We've zoomed in on the agencies that we want to work with, and we do a great job so that we can continue to do work. On the inspection side, that's always, work coming and going. So right now we finally became SBA certified. So the idea behind that, 8A certified, is to zoom in again on the agency that you want to work with. So that means building a relationship with whoever is handing out work, so that they'll know that, hey, we're available, we're good at what we do. So that potential and the performance sort of just comes together. We can't do everything. We're not architects for everybody. What I love about, this is an experience that happened to me with CNHED. We were contacted by Children's to submit a proposal, and we just rejected it out and out because we said we're not medical architects. And then someone from the organization contacted us and say, why didn't you bid on this? What's going on? So, and I explained, I said, hey, I'm not going to bid on something that I'm going to fail at. So he said, let me get back to you. He got back to me and he said, there are lots of offices there. Just, frame your proposal to what you can do within it. And we were successful. So the partnering and with, you just never know who is out there to back you up. And we have had some great backers. So anyway, that's for me.
Yeah. And I know that we're right at time, and I still see questions coming in. because this has been an incredible panel and it's really unlocked so many resources. I've learned so much. I wanted to before I turn to Lindsay to close this out, I just wanted to thank our incredible panelists for sharing this hour with me, and for sharing your knowledge, expertise, and advice as well. And with that, I'd like to turn it to Lindsay.
Thank you so much, Deccan T. I truly wish we could keep this conversation going. We'll be sure to circulate the questions that we weren't able to get to our panelists so that we can get some responses back out to folks. So thank you so much to each of you, Janelle, Sasha, Monica, Deccan T, Dr. Abram. Your insights today have been incredible. You know, as I was listening to you, well, one, I thought it's good that I'm on mute because I'm over here like, amen, amen. And I know we got a lot of praise and just positive messages and reactions to your comments in the chat from those who are attending. It's interesting that the theme of this panel is breaking the bias and looking at you all as women leaders in traditionally male-dominated industries, but each of you opened up about your personal lived experiences and the ways that informs how you approach your work, your leadership. So I just want to thank all of you for being so open in what you shared with each of us today. And thank you to everyone who attended. We will send out a recording in case you're interested in watching this back and listening again to all of the insights and wisdoms that we were able to glean. So thank you and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.